So in our last video, we manually built an appliance from the ground up. And if you're thinking, man, that was a lot of work, you're partially right. Keep in mind, due to the lab, I had to do some work at the CLI to get things ready in even G. If I was actually deploying this directly on VMware or it was a physical appliance, keep in mind the goal is get internet access. I rarely ever have to go to the console command line like we did in most any of my deployments. It's typically pretty plug and play. Plug it in, let it get an IP address, and as long as it has internet access, it shows up, and I walk through the config wizard to assign it IP info on the LAN and WAN side, and we're off to the races. It's typically a 10-minute process. That being said, there are a lot of options in deployment profiles, templates, and pre-configuration around zero-touch provisioning when we start to look at larger deployments. So let's take a look at a few of those and what they have to offer us. So first we'll look at deployment profiles. Under configuration, deployment profiles, again, search menu makes it quick and easy if you try to look for it there. The deployment profiles are basically a WAN LAN site interface config template. Everything we set on the deployment tab can be configured here with the exception of the actual IP addresses assigned to the interfaces. If your deployment uses a standard set of interfaces in this configuration, you can configure these here and apply that when you set up a new appliance so that it's all ready to go. All you have to do at that point is put in the IP addresses through the process. There are a number of pre-configured profiles here for you that come built into the system: dual internet, single internet, LTE only, etc. But if we need to create something new, we most certainly can. We'll go ahead and configure one of these here, and I'll go ahead and show you how to apply it. So I'm going to add a new deployment profile. We'll shoot for the moon and say that our site has pretty much every connectivity piece under the sun that's offered to us, and we'll go ahead and create one. I'll call this dual DIA and PLS LTE. It creates it here, and now I go ahead and router mode was already set by default. On the WAN side, I'm going to go ahead and add a number of interfaces. What we'll notice here is these interfaces tie physically and come up from the WAN side interfaces. We can apply our labels. Again, keep in mind, doing this means as soon as this comes up, when we apply it and give it IPs, it's going to build tunnels. INET 1, INET 2, and LTE. Over here, we would set our firewall mode. Typically kind of allow all for the MPLS. We'll do stateful plus snap for these two guys, and then we'll go stateful plus snap for this one too. Now, I would enter my bandwidth for all of these as well. So in this case, I only have 20 meg licenses, so we'll fudge this and make this guy a 3 meg circuit. This guy will be a 10 meg circuit. This guy will be a 5 meg circuit. And this guy will be a 2 meg circuit. And if I hit calc, we should see that comes up to my 20 meg exactly. And again, this doesn't have to match, right? If I've only got 15 meg and I've got a 20 meg license, that's the lowest they'll go, so it's not a big deal. The big deal is that this number, total inbound and outbound, is set appropriately based on the connections you have coming in, as this applies to the shaper and will physically limit the amount of traffic in and out of the appliance. The other thing to keep in mind here, because I always feel it's a little backwards, is these arrows refer to the inbound-outbound direction, right? We use a lot of broadband circuits are, 50 down, 3 up, or whatever. Keep in mind that I always think and get these backwards. The top arrow is the outbound, the bottom arrow is the inbound. I've configured so many of these where I've done that backwards, assuming it's download and upload. It's in reverse order here. So then over to the LAN side, we would go ahead and add whatever interfaces we need to here as well. We'll get into more information about what we could do with the LAN side interfaces when it comes to the security topic, but I'm just going to add a second one here. As soon as I save this, it's ready to go. Now, one other thing that I'm going to bring up here is the way that these interfaces are configured. As I previously mentioned, I have a different physical interface for each of my connections here. I don't have to do that, right? This is likely a gig interface. If I had a switch upstream that my internet, or a pair of switches that my internet providers came into on some non-routed VLANs, I could use one interface using VLAN SDIs to accomplish the same goal. In that scenario, I would delete the second interface, and instead of adding a WAN interface, I'd add an IP to an existing WAN interface. In this scenario, if I made this inet2 stateful plus SNAT, let's say this was VLAN 1001 going to the switch, and this was VLAN 1002 going to the switch, our same 5 meg. At that point, I've successfully done the exact same thing, only I'm only using one physical interface. Obviously, on the other side of this, plugged into a switch, this would need to be a trunk, allowing these VLANs. This is tagging, so at that point, when traffic leaves, it's going to be tagged in VLAN 1001. We can do the same thing here on the LAN side if we need to have VLAN sub-interfaces in different labels, firewall zones, segments, and firewall modes. So I'll save that. So now how would we apply this? Well, the simple way to apply it is if I go to the configuration wizard again. Again, you can run this wizard anytime. It doesn't have to be at the startup. I can go next, and up here we see my deployment profile. In here, this is the one I built. When I click on it, all of this is pre-configured for me. I just throw in my IP addresses, click next apply, and away I go. I'm not going to do that because, of course, that's not applicable in my lab, but that kind of covers the deployment profiles. So now we'll move on to templates. The templates give us a way to standardize a lot of the configurations options needed across all of our appliances. They can be applied to one or many appliances and contain a number of different settings. SNMP, DNS, date time, routing, access lists, it goes on and on. Again, configuration, templates. And in here we can see by default there's a default template group with these particular settings set. You can choose to apply this as you go through and take these, but typically in a brand new setup we would go through and figure out what we need here and get a method to, based on the deployment, how we want to architect these templates. A lot of people will create a default template that, of course, very similar to, I guess, Active Directory and group policy and whatnot, where the default would apply, have configurations that would apply to all of the edge connects in the environment. The next template down may be regionalized for some specifics per region, so on and so forth. So let's take a look at some of this. The default template group, again, this is pre-canned, this is what comes out, has SNMP, although it's not enabled. So right now, let's go ahead and enable this, give it a trap community, give it a read-only community. I could add trap receivers if I have an NMS that I want to send that information to. DNS here in my environment, I'm going to go ahead and change these. I've got a pair of DNS servers that I want to use. Add my domain name. Date and time. So this kind of gets into, you know, how the organization wants to structure this. When we look here, I have two appliances that are in the central time zone, and I have one on the Eastern and one in Pacific. So for me, unless I'm going to use UTC across the board, it may make sense for me to create template groups that would apply to each of these, where the Central may get one, or Central and South may get one, East and West may get another. Let's go ahead and do that. So in this scenario, I'm going to remove this altogether. And again, you can see once I open that pane of what to add here, I get a whole list of different pieces of configuration that I can put in. So now that I've removed that, I'm not going to touch any of these others right now. But the big thing to note here is I've made changes to this, and these templates are applied, or this template is applied to all of these Silver Peaks. So when I save this, gives me the option to put a note in for the audit log, tells me what I've done. When I hit Save Template Changes, you'll notice right away this kicked off, and it's actually pushing that to all those appliances. So careful, right, with template changes. If you make a change to a template that's assigned to a bunch of appliances, it's going to take effect immediately and push that config out. Now, I had configured one other template called routing for my lab. This I did manually create prior, and really what this is how I wanted to handle the routes to the SD-WAN specifically. So here, if I take a look at this, my routing, I'm advertising LAN side, I'm not WAN. I'm not redistributing learn BGP routes to Silver Peak peers. The only thing in here I changed was this route map to BGP-local, and I created that route map, which of course is right here. I'm redistributing routes to SD-WAN fabric. I can either merge or replace. If it's replace, it's obviously going to delete everything on the appliance when I do it. My map name was BGP local, and down here I'm basically saying, hey, if I learn the route via BGP or locally, go ahead and advertise it to the SD-WAN. I have other options here for BGP inbound and outbound that would relate to BGP connections either to a core switch or an MPLS. In that scenario where I'm saying, hey, I'm going to create a map name that will filter, allow different routes in and out from those BGP neighbors that I create when I bring up BGP neighbors. If I come back over here, you can see this isn't just match criteria for BGP local static. If I edit one of these, I have the ability to choose a prefix that I'm going to allow in this and make it more specific based on BGP communities, whether I'm going to permit or deny it, set a metric, that sort of stuff. So in a number of environments, right, these get fairly lengthy if we need to be pruning networks or prefixes, etc. From that perspective. So now we need to set up our new template groups, the regionalized ones that in my case I'm just going to add the time zone in the time zone configuration and NTP configuration to. So up here I'm going to do add, and I'm going to give this a name of Pacific. This could be a region in your organization. It could be anything, as long as it makes sense. Again, the other thing we have to watch out for is that we don't have multiple templates assigning different values to the same things, right? There is a hierarchy of what would win out in that scenario if I tried to apply the same thing in two different templates. But in this case, we removed the date time information from the previous default template. So here I'm going to add this guy and this guy. I'm going to set this to Pacific US. Save that. And I'm going to create another new one. So we'll add our date time again. Add our NTP servers, US Central, save. And again, here it's interesting too, right? When you save these changes, it tells you how many appliances it's going to affect. We haven't applied these to any appliances, so of course we're just creating them. It's not going to bother anything. Now we need to add our one for Eastern. And again, this is just an example for date and time. There obviously could be a number of different regionalized settings that you would use in your environment. I'll save that. So now that we've got these created, how do we assign them to the devices? Just like anything, there's a number of ways, right? We can go through this config wizard, and at the end of it, it will give us the option to assign these templates. Or if I go to administration, configuration and apply template groups, here I have my list of appliances. It shows me what groups they have today, the default and the routing. In this scenario, I can choose just my central, control click just my south, knowing those are central, check central, shows it's going to add it, hit apply, and we see up here it kicked that off. Then if I go to my east, apply that, and my Pacific, and apply that. So once these get applied to the devices, I should be able to go look at the DNS settings and whatnot on the device and validate that, yep, this all got updated. Okay, our notice went away. I'm going to just go ahead and spot check one of these. Again, if I right click and go to Appliance Manager, that's the same as me essentially logging on to the appliance locally. I could, of course, do this. Oops. Date and time. And I could look in here to see what the settings are. Looks like they're right here. In addition, if I go to the device itself, I look at DNS, I see I got my 2 new servers, my domain name. If I go to date and time, got that. So everything pushed out to the appliances just fine. And that kind of covers templates. Again, lots of different options, and a good way to maintain, configuration consistency and save a lot of time in deployment. So the last piece we'll talk about here, albeit briefly, is pre-configuration. This is where we typically look at the zero-touch provisioning aspect and allows us to essentially pre-configure pretty much any aspect of the appliance as soon as it comes online. I'm not going to go into this too far other than to show that it's here. It's a huge config file. Obviously, you can customize it to meet the environment you need and then duplicate it, and it is tied, to individual appliances, etc. So under configuration, pre-configuration, you can see here I don't have anything. If I click new, I get to give it a name. and a serial number, appliance tag if we're using them, and I also get the option to auto approve it once it's discovered. Over here you can see we have this config file that is essentially everything under the sun, from the address to the interfaces to the routing. Everything we've covered thus far and more in the config can be set here. So of course you could create one of these for a site, and then of course copy it, give it a different host name and any device specific information, IP addresses, etc. And then when the device boots up, connects to Orchestrator, if the serial number matches, it'll of course auto approve it, push the config to it, and do everything needed to get that guy online. So yeah, if we're looking at deploying hundreds of these at once, that would obviously be kind of the zero-touch provisioning piece and get everything up and running. Again, I'm not going to go through this, but if there was enough response on the video, I could of course do a video on that itself. It would be pretty in-depth.